They told me I wasn't welcome at their Thanksgiving table until I apologized for being myself. His billionaire family thought they could break me with their silence and shame. But what they didn't know, I owned the one thing they couldn't live without, and I was about to take it all back. If you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong, or been disrespected by people who underestimated you, stay with me. This story is about power, dignity, and the sweetest revenge that money can't buy. Make sure you're subscribed, because you won't want to miss how this ends. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd marry into a billionaire family. That wasn't my dream. My dream was building something from nothing. And by the time I was 32, I'd done exactly that. My name is Simone Brooks, and I created a tech company that connected small businesses with affordable marketing tools. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. And it was worth $50 million when I met Daniel Whitmore at a charity gala 4 years ago. Daniel wasn't what I expected. He didn't lead with his last name or his family's money. He was quiet, thoughtful, and when he asked about my business, he actually listened. For 6 months, we built something real. Away from the spotlight of his family's empire, the Whitmores owned half of Connecticut's commercial real estate. They had a compound that looked like it belonged in a magazine, with 47 bedrooms and staff who'd worked there for generations. But Daniel made me feel like none of that mattered. He made me feel chosen. The wedding should have been my first warning. It was beautiful, intimate, exactly what we wanted. But I noticed how his mother, Catherine, smiled without her eyes ever warming up, how his father, Thomas, asked me 3 times what my parents did for a living, like he was trying to place me in some hierarchy I didn't know existed. His older brother Christopher made a toast that included the phrase, fresh perspective, and somehow made it sound like an insult. But Daniel squeezed my hand under the table and whispered that he loved me, and I convinced myself that love would be enough. For 3 years, I played the game. I showed up to their family dinners, where Catherine would touch my braids and ask if they were real. I smiled through Thomas's lectures about the right way to run a business. Even though my company's growth outpaced his projections every quarter, I watched Christopher make jokes that weren't quite jokes, always with that edge that made my skin crawl. And every single time, Daniel would say the same thing. They'll come around. Just give them time. But time wasn't changing anything. It was just teaching me how to make myself smaller. My company kept growing. We expanded into 3 new markets, and I brought on investors to fund the growth. One of those investors was Whitmore Property Holdings. Daniel suggested it, actually. He said it would be good for the family to see what I was building, to be part of it. They bought 35% of my company for $15 million. At the time, it felt like acceptance. Looking back, it was the beginning of my leverage. October came around, and with it, the email invitation from Catherine for Thanksgiving at the estate. It was formal, almost cold, the way all her communications were. Daniel was excited. He said this year would be different, that his family was finally warming up to me. I wanted to believe him. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, we attended Christopher's daughter's birthday party at their house in the Hamptons. Everything was perfect, the way Whitmore events always were. Catered food, live music, enough champagne to float a boat. That's when Christopher made the joke. I won't repeat it here, but it was about black women and intelligence, wrapped up in a story he thought was hilarious. The table laughed. Not everyone, but enough people that the sound echoed in my chest. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I just said, very clearly, "That's not funny. That's racist." The laughter died like someone had cut the power. Christopher's face went red, then pale. Catherine reached across the table and touched my hand with her cold fingers and said, "Simone, darling, you're being too sensitive." Christopher didn't mean anything by it, but he did mean it, and she knew it, and everyone at that table knew it. Daniel said nothing. He looked down at his plate, like the pattern on the china was suddenly fascinating. That night, in our hotel room, he told me I should have just let it go, that I embarrassed Christopher, that his family was old-fashioned, and I needed to understand their sense of humor. I asked him when he was going to understand mine. We didn't speak the rest of the weekend. 1 week before Thanksgiving, Daniel's phone rang while he was in the shower. I glanced at the screen and saw it was his mother. He'd left it on speaker by accident, so I heard everything. Catherine's voice came through crystal clear. "Daniel, your wife needs to apologize to Christopher." What she said was completely out of line. She embarrassed him in front of everyone. And frankly, she's not welcome at Thanksgiving until she makes this right. I waited for Daniel to fight back, to defend me. Instead, I heard him say, "Mom, that's not exactly fair," in this weak, defeated voice that made my stomach turn. She wasn't asking, she was telling, and he was agreeing. That night, Daniel sat me down and suggested I call his mother. "Just apologize," he said. "Keep the peace. It's just words," he said. But they weren't just words. They were my dignity. They were every time I'd swallowed disrespect and smiled through it. They were 3 years of making myself smaller so his family could feel bigger. I told him, no. I told him I had nothing to apologize for, and he looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. I couldn't sleep that night. I went to my home office and tried to distract myself with work, going through investor reports and quarterly statements. That's when I found it. The original contract with Whitmore Property Holdings, buried in a folder I hadn't looked at in 2 years. I read through the terms, the clauses, the fine print that my lawyer had insisted on. And there it was, on page 17. The founder retains the right to repurchase all investor shares at fair market value, with 60 days written notice. I sat back in my chair and felt something shift inside me. My company wasn't worth $50 million anymore. The latest valuation had come in at $250 million. That meant the Whitmore's 35% stake was worth $87.5 million. And I could buy them out. I had the liquidity from a secondary offering we'd completed 6 months earlier. I had the legal right. And suddenly, I had a plan. I spent the next 2 days digging into Whitmore family finances. I used every connection I had in the business world, called in favors, pieced together information like a puzzle. What I found shocked me. The Whitmore empire looked solid from the outside, but it was a house built on loans and leverage. They were asset-rich but cash-poor. Almost everything they owned was mortgaged or tied up in investments. And 6 months ago, they'd made a massive bet on a commercial development project in downtown Hartford that was failing spectacularly. Here's what made it even more interesting. The quarterly dividends from my company had become essential to their cash flow. That money funded their lifestyle, the private jets, the yacht, the staff at the mansion, Catherine's shopping trips to Paris. Without that steady income, they'd have to make cuts, real cuts, the kind that would hurt their pride as much as their bank accounts. I called my CFO, Andre, who'd been with me since the beginning. I asked him a hypothetical question. What would happen if we restructured our investor base? He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Simone, whatever you're thinking, I'm with you." I called my lead investor, Margaret, a venture capitalist who'd believed in me when nobody else would. I told her I was considering buying out the Whitmores. She laughed and said, "About time. They've been dead weight since day one. If you need backing, you've got it." That night, I sat with my mother, Beverly, on the phone for 2 hours. I told her everything. The joke, the demand for an apology, what I'd discovered about the finances. I asked her if what I was planning made me as bad as them. My mama was quiet for a long time, and then she said something I'll never forget. "Baby, there's a difference between revenge and boundaries. Revenge is about hurting someone. Boundaries are about protecting yourself. What you're doing, that's a boundary. You're showing them what it costs to disrespect you." I didn't tell Daniel. Part of me wanted to see if he'd do the right thing on his own, if he'd stand up to his family without me pushing him. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I filed the buyback notice with my lawyers. It was legal, binding, and airtight. The Whitmores had 60 days to accept fair market value for their shares, and the quarterly dividend payments would cease immediately. I scheduled a meeting with their family lawyer for the following Monday. Everything was set in motion. Thanksgiving morning came, and Daniel was getting dressed to go to his parents' house, alone. He kept looking at me like I was going to crack, like I'd give in at the last minute. He asked me one more time to just call his mother and apologize. I looked at him, this man I'd loved enough to marry, and I felt nothing but disappointment. I told him I wasn't sorry for having dignity, and that he should go enjoy his family. He left frustrated, maybe even angry, and I felt peace for the first time in weeks. I spent Thanksgiving with my mother, cooking our own meal in my kitchen. We made cornbread dressing and greens and sweet potato pie. We laughed and told stories and didn't talk about the Whitmores once. It was perfect. It was free. Friday morning, 6 in the morning, Daniel's phone started ringing. It was Christopher, then Catherine, then Thomas, back-to-back calls that Daniel answered with increasing confusion. Their family lawyer had received the buyback notice. The Whitmores were panicking. I could hear Thomas through the phone. "What does your wife think she's doing? This is extortion." Catherine was shrieking something about lawyers and lawsuits. Christopher just kept saying, "She can't do this. She can't." Except I could. And I had. Daniel came home and found me in the kitchen, drinking coffee like it was any other Saturday morning. He was pale, shaking a little, and he asked me what I'd done. I told him calmly that I'd exercised my legal right to buy out his family's stake in my company. He said I couldn't afford it. I told him I already had. The money was in escrow, the paperwork was filed, and in 60 days, the Whitmores would have no connection to my business whatsoever. He asked if this was because of Thanksgiving. I looked at him and said no. This was because I deserved respect. This was because for 3 years, I'd made myself smaller so his family could feel comfortable, and I was done. This was because he'd asked me to apologize for having self-respect, and I'd finally realized that the person I needed to apologize to was myself for staying so long. The emergency family meeting happened that Sunday. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway with my lawyer. The whole Whitmore clan was there in the formal living room, the one with the paintings that cost more than most people's houses. Catherine tried to take control immediately, saying this was ridiculous and they'd sue me into oblivion. My lawyer calmly explained that I was following the exact contract their lawyers had drafted. Every I was dotted, every T was crossed. Thomas tried to negotiate, asked what it would take for me to back out of the deal. I told him there was no price, because this wasn't a negotiation. Christopher, red-faced and furious, shouted that I was destroying the family over a stupid joke. And that's when something inside me crystallized into pure clarity. I stood up and I spoke. I told them they wanted an apology, and for what? For having self-respect? For refusing to laugh at my own dehumanization. I'd given them 3 years, 3 years of tolerating their comments, their coldness, their barely concealed contempt. They'd taken from me not just money, but my peace, my dignity, and my husband's loyalty. They'd made me feel small in my own marriage, unwelcome in what should have been my family. I told them they thought I needed them, but the truth was, they needed me. They needed my company's dividends to fund their lifestyle. They needed me to stay quiet and grateful. And now they were going to learn what it cost to disrespect someone. I didn't need their acceptance. I didn't need their approval. And I definitely didn't need their money draining my company dry while they contributed nothing but judgment and disdain. I walked out of that house with my head high, and I never looked back. The fallout was immediate and brutal for them. The Whitmores scrambled to replace the income stream. They had to sell assets, let go of half their staff, sell the yacht that Thomas loved more than his children. They were still billionaires, but humbled, reduced. And for a family that valued appearance above everything, that was its own kind of justice. Daniel moved out the following week. He stayed with his parents, and we filed for separation. Not divorce yet, but the marriage was over. He'd made his choice, and it wasn't me. Some nights, I was sad about it. Most nights, I was relieved. My company exploded without the Whitmore involvement. I brought in new investors who aligned with my values, people who wanted to build rather than just extract. We expanded into 6 new markets. I used the profits to start a foundation supporting women entrepreneurs, specifically Black and brown women in tech who face the same barriers I did. Within 6 months, my company's valuation hit $400 million. 6 months after everything fell apart, I was invited to give a keynote speech at a major tech conference. The topic was knowing your worth in business and life. As I stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, I saw Daniel in the back row. He looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. After my speech, he waited until the crowd cleared and approached me. He said he should have defended me. I told him, yes, he should have. But I also thanked him for showing me who he really was, because knowing the truth set me free. I was better now, stronger, free in a way I'd never been when I was trying to fit into his family's world. I walked away from that conversation, surrounded by people who respected me, who saw my value, who didn't need me to shrink so they could shine. And I realized that the Whitmores had actually given me a gift. They'd pushed me hard enough that I finally pushed back. They'd underestimated me so completely that when I showed them who I really was, they never saw it coming. They thought money was power, but real power is knowing your value and never apologizing for taking up space. Real power is building something so strong that the people who try to diminish you realize they can't survive without you. And the sweetest revenge isn't hurting them. It's thriving without them, so completely and so undeniably that their absence from your life becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. I'm Simone Brooks. I own my company outright now. I answer to no one but myself, and I've never been happier. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from. I learned that the hard way, but I also learned my own strength. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have done the same thing? And subscribe, because I've got more stories about people who refuse to be broken. Remember, never apologize for knowing your worth. I stood there watching my mother-in-law throw my suitcase down the marble steps like I was trash. My husband, he was recording it on his phone, laughing with his sister. They had no idea that suitcase was empty on purpose, because everything I owned, including the rights to his billion-dollar idea, was already locked away in my name. Let me tell you how I planned the sweetest revenge of my life. Before I tell you how I took everything from them, hit that subscribe button, because this revenge was years in the making. Comment, checkmate, if you love a good takedown story. Now let me take you back to where it all started. And trust me, you've never heard a revenge story quite like this one. 5 years ago, I thought I was living a fairy tale. My name is Danielle Crawford, and I was a 28-year-old software engineer working at a decent tech company in California. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I had my own apartment, my own car, and I was damn good at what I did. That's when I met Trevor Whitmore at a tech conference in San Francisco. Trevor was everything I thought I wanted. Tall, handsome, charming, and he came from serious money. His family owned real estate all over the state, and his mother Helena ran their investment firm. He pursued me like I was the only woman in the world. Flowers every week, surprise trips to wine country. He'd show up at my office with coffee, and that smile that made my knees weak. Looking back now, I can see it was all calculated. But back then, I was just a girl who thought she'd finally found her person. We got married after a year of dating. The wedding was at their family estate, this massive mansion with actual pillars and a fountain in the front. I should have known something was wrong when Helena insisted on planning everything without asking what I wanted. My family sat on one side of the venue, looking uncomfortable in their Sunday best, while Trevor's side wore designer everything and looked at us like we were the entertainment. But I ignored the red flags because I was in love, or at least I thought I was. The mask came off about 3 months after the wedding. Trevor stopped being romantic. He'd come home late, barely talk to me, and spent most of his time in his office, working on what he called his big idea. Helena started treating me like the help. She'd call me at 7 in the morning, demanding I come over to organize her closet or plan dinner parties. And Trevor's sister Candace, she made it clear I wasn't good enough to be a Whitmore. She'd make comments about my clothes being from Target, my hair not being done at the right salons, my family not understanding their world. But the worst part was how they treated my work. I'd come home exhausted from writing code all day, and Trevor would hand me his laptop, asking me to just look at something quick. That something would turn into hours of me fixing his problems while he played video games. Helena would call my job cute, like I was working at a lemonade stand, instead of developing security systems for major corporations. They made me feel small every single day, and for a while, I let them. Then one night, about a year into the marriage, everything changed. Trevor was in the shower, and his phone kept buzzing on the nightstand. I wasn't trying to snoop, but I saw Candace's name pop up with a message preview that said, "Can't believe she actually thinks you'll put her name on it." My stomach dropped. I picked up that phone and read through their entire conversation, and what I found made my blood run cold. Trevor had been working on an app idea for months, an AI-powered scheduling platform that could revolutionize how businesses manage their time. He talked about it constantly, called it his ticket to real success, separate from his family's money. But here's what I didn't know. He'd been having me build it. Every time he asked me to look at something quick, every weekend I spent helping him with tech problems. I was actually creating his entire application. And according to those text messages, he never planned to give me any credit. Candace had written, "Dad always said never put a woman's name on anything valuable. She's too useful to lose right now, but once it launches, you can upgrade to someone more appropriate." I sat on the edge of that bed, reading message after message. Helena had written, "Make sure the intellectual property is airtight in your name." These tech wives always try to claim they helped. Trevor had responded with laughing emojis. They even had jokes about how I was so eager to please that I'd probably work on it for free forever. There were messages about investor meetings I didn't know about, term sheets being drafted, a whole company being built on my work while they planned to list me as an assistant if they mentioned me at all. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream or throw the phone or confront him when he got out of the shower. Instead, I did something smarter. I smiled when he came to bed. I kissed him goodnight, and I started planning the most strategic takedown of my life. If they wanted to play chess, I was about to show them I'd been studying the game my whole life. The next morning, I went to work like normal. But on my lunch break, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, Diane Washington, the best intellectual property attorney in the state. I told her everything, showed her the texts, explained how I'd built every piece of that application. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "Baby girl, do you have proof you created this?" I nodded. Every single line of code I'd written had my digital signature embedded in it. Every design document was time-stamped on my personal laptop. I had emails where Trevor asked me specific technical questions, and I provided the answers. I had everything. Diane smiled and said, "Then let's make sure you keep what's yours." Over the next 6 months, I became someone I didn't recognize. And I mean that in the best way possible. On the surface, I was still the same Danielle, still cooked Helena's dinner parties, still smiled when Candace made her little comments about my shoes or my hair, still stayed up late, helping Trevor with his app. But underneath, I was building a fortress they'd never see coming. First, I created my own LLC, Crawford Tech Solutions, filed it in a different county so they wouldn't accidentally see it. Then I took every piece of code I'd written for Trevor's app and I registered it under my company's intellectual property. The original files, the source code, the algorithms, all of it was time-stamped and documented as my creation. I built a second version of the app, a better version, and kept it on a completely separate server that only I could access. The version I gave Trevor, it worked, but it was incomplete. like giving someone a car with no engine. It looked good, ran well enough for demos, but it would never scale. It would crash under real pressure. And only I knew how to fix it, because only I understood how it actually worked. I also started documenting everything else. I recorded conversations on my phone, saved every text message where they disrespected me, took photos of emails discussing Trevor's company that I'd built with my own hands. I created a paper trail so clear that no lawyer in the world could argue against it. And the whole time, I played my role perfectly. The grateful wife, the helpful daughter-in-law, the woman who didn't know her own worth. Trevor's big investor meeting was scheduled for March 15th. He'd been talking about it for weeks, practicing his pitch in the mirror, getting custom suits made. Helena had invited her whole social circle to a celebration party she'd already planned for afterward. Candace had posted on social media about her brother changing the tech industry. The arrogance was unbelievable, but I let them have it. I even helped Trevor with his presentation slides, making sure they looked impressive while keeping the actual functional code locked away where he couldn't touch it. 2 weeks before the meeting, Trevor told me he needed me to sign some paperwork. Standard stuff for spouses when one person is starting a company. Liability protection, asset agreements, boring legal things. He barely looked at me when he pushed the papers across the kitchen table. "Just sign where the tabs are," he said, already looking back at his phone. What he didn't know was that I'd had Diane review every document first, and she'd added one small clause, buried on page 47 in dense legal language, that stated I retained full intellectual property rights to any software I personally created, regardless of marital asset laws. Trevor signed without reading. His lawyer signed without catching it. Helena notarized it without question. And just like that, I had legal ownership of everything that mattered, signed and witnessed by the very people trying to steal from me. I filed for divorce exactly 1 week before Trevor's investor meeting. But I did it quietly, through a lawyer in a different city, and I made sure the papers wouldn't be served until after his big day. I wanted him to have his moment, his confidence, his celebration party, because the higher they climbed, the harder they'd fall, and I wanted them at the very top when I pulled the rug out. During that week, I moved my real belongings out of the mansion little by little. Important documents, sentimental items, my good jewelry, anything that actually mattered. I put it all in a storage unit across town under my LLC's name. The clothes in my closet, I replaced them with cheap stuff from thrift stores. That suitcase they'd eventually throw down the stairs, I packed it with outfits that cost me $40 total, because I knew Helena and Candace. I knew their pride and their cruelty. I knew eventually they'd try to humiliate me, and I wanted to be ready. The morning of Trevor's investor meeting, I watched him put on his expensive suit and practice his opening lines. "Today's the day," he said, kissing me on the forehead like I was a child. "After this, everything changes for us." He had no idea how right he was, just not in the way he thought. I smiled and told him I was proud of him. Then I got in my car and drove to that same investor meeting, except I wasn't going as his wife. I was going as his competition. The conference room was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A long mahogany table where 12 investors sat with their tablets and coffee. Trevor stood at the front with his presentation on the screen behind him, looking every bit the confident entrepreneur. He didn't see me slip in the back. Nobody did. I was just another person in business attire, sitting quietly with my laptop bag. Trevor started his pitch, and I have to give him credit. He'd memorized my words perfectly. He talked about the problem with scheduling systems, the market opportunity, the revolutionary AI solution he'd developed. The investors nodded along, asked good questions, seemed genuinely interested. Then came the demo, the moment where he'd show them the actual working application. And that's when everything fell apart. He clicked the button to launch the app. The screen loaded, then it froze. He clicked again. An error message popped up. He started sweating, making jokes about technology being unpredictable. Tried to restart the program. It crashed completely. The investors shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. One woman in the back raised her hand and asked, "Did you actually test this before coming here?" Trevor stammered, made excuses about the Wi-Fi, about version updates, about anything he could think of. But it was clear to everyone in that room that he had no idea how his own product worked because he couldn't fix it. He couldn't even explain what was wrong, just kept clicking buttons like that would magically solve the problem. That's when I stood up. Every head in the room turned toward me. Trevor's face went white. "Danielle, what are you doing here?" I walked to the front of that conference room, like I owned it, because in a way I did. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the confusion. My name is Danielle Crawford, and I'm here to present the actual working version of this application, along with some information about who really created it." The head investor, a woman named Ruth Chen, leaned forward. "I'm sorry, who are you exactly?" "I'm Trevor's wife. And I'm the software engineer who built every line of code he just failed to demonstrate." I pulled out my laptop, connected it to their system, and launched my version of the app. It worked perfectly, smooth, fast, everything they'd been promised. Then, while they watched it run, I pulled up my evidence, the code repository with my name and timestamps, the design documents from my personal drive, the emails where Trevor asked me how to solve specific technical problems, the text messages between him and his sister discussing how to keep my name off the intellectual property. The room went completely silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning and nothing else. Ruth looked from the screen to Trevor, then back to me. "Mr. Whitmore, did you create this application?" Trevor tried to lie. He stuttered something about us working together, about it being a team effort, about marriage meaning shared success. But I cut him off. "Trevor can't read code. He doesn't know Python from JavaScript. Every technical decision, every algorithm, every feature you see was created by me, and I have legal documentation proving it." I handed Ruth a folder. "That's the intellectual property registration under my company, Crawford Tech Solutions, dated 8 months ago. It's also the spousal agreement Trevor signed 2 weeks ago, which you'll find on page 47, gives me sole ownership of any software I personally created." Ruth opened the folder, read the documents, looked at her colleagues. Then she looked at Trevor with the kind of cold disappointment that's worse than anger. "Mr. Whitmore, you wasted our time. This meeting is over." Trevor tried to explain, to fix it, to save himself. But it was done. The investors started packing up their things. And then Ruth turned to me. "Ms. Crawford, would you be available for a meeting this afternoon? Because unlike your husband, I believe you actually have something worth investing in." I scheduled the meeting right there, 3 o'clock, same building, different conference room. Then I walked out while Trevor stood there, his perfect pitch in ruins, his big moment destroyed, and his wife, the woman he'd underestimated, walking away with everything he thought was his. By 6 o'clock that evening, I had a term sheet, $15 million for 30% of my company. Better terms than Trevor ever dreamed of getting. I signed it in front of 3 lawyers, had it notarized, and posted a single photo on social media. Just my hand signing the contract with the caption, "Built by women, owned by women, funded on our own terms." Helena called me 17 times that night. I didn't answer. Trevor showed up at my apartment, the one I'd secretly rented 2 months earlier, and I didn't open the door. Candace sent me paragraphs of text messages calling me every name you can imagine. I blocked her because I didn't need to engage. I'd already won. The next day, Trevor's lawyer called my lawyer to discuss the divorce. They wanted to negotiate, to find a fair settlement, to keep things quiet. Diane laughed and said, "Your client signed away his rights. My client is taking half of every marital asset, per state law, and she's keeping her company because he literally gave it to her in writing. We'll see you in court if you want, but I promise you'll lose." They tried to fight it anyway. hired an expensive firm, filed motions claiming I'd stolen Trevor's idea. But every single piece of evidence supported my story. The judge looked at the timeline, the documentation, the signed agreements, and ruled in my favor on every count. Trevor was ordered to pay my legal fees. Helena had to liquidate assets to cover their lawyer bills. And Candace, her trust fund took a hit when the family's reputation tanked. That brings us back to the suitcase. 2 months after the investor meeting, after the divorce was filed, but before it was finalized, I had to go back to the mansion one last time to get something from their safe. My grandmother's ring that Helena had insisted on keeping there for security. It was legally mine, and the court had ordered them to return it. I pulled up to that house in my new car, a Tesla I'd bought with my first investor payment, and Helena was standing at the top of the steps with my old suitcase in her hands, the cheap one I'd packed with thrift store clothes. Candace stood next to her with her phone out, and Trevor was in the doorway with a drink in his hand, smirking like he'd already won something. Helena threw that suitcase down the marble steps. It bounced, fell open, and cheap clothes scattered everywhere. "That's all you're worth," she screamed. "Garbage clothes for a garbage woman. You thought you could humiliate my son. You thought you could steal from this family." I didn't move. Just watch the suitcase settle on the ground. Watch them laugh and record me. Watch them think they'd finally gotten their revenge. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Turned the screen toward them. "That's my account balance. $15 million. What's yours, Helena?" Her face changed. Trevor stopped laughing. I walked up those steps, past the scattered clothes I didn't care about, and stood in front of all three of them. "Your son didn't create anything. He stole my work, and I took it back. The investors who rejected him, they funded me. The company he thought was his, it's mine. Legally and completely. And this house?" I smiled. "Well, that's the best part." I pulled out another document. "Helena, you mortgaged this property 8 months ago to invest in Trevor's venture, the one that doesn't exist anymore. You're 3 months behind on payments, and the bank is foreclosing. But don't worry, I bought the debt. This house, it's mine now. You have 30 days to vacate." Helena collapsed into a chair, just sat down right there on the porch, like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. Candace started screaming, calling me every name she could think of, but her voice sounded far away and powerless. And Trevor, he tried to grab my arm, tried to say something about how we could work this out, how I didn't have to do this, how we used to love each other. I pulled my arm away and looked him dead in the eye. "You had a brilliant woman who would have built empires with you. Instead, you tried to use her and throw her away. That's not on me. That's on you." Then I walked into that house, went to the safe, took my grandmother's ring, and left. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks later. I got half of everything we'd accumulated during the marriage, which wasn't much because Trevor had been living off his trust fund and his family's money. But I didn't need their money. I had my own. My company launched officially in June. Within 4 months, we had 50,000 users. Within 8 months, we were valued at over $100 million. I hired an all-woman development team, started a mentorship program for women in tech who'd been underestimated or stolen from. And I bought that mansion, not to live in. I bought a penthouse downtown that overlooks the water. I bought the mansion and turned it into my company's headquarters, renovated every room, put my logo on the front gate where their family crest used to be. Every single day, I walk through the door they threw me out of, and I run my empire from the rooms where they made me feel small. 6 months ago, Trevor applied for a job at one of my competitor companies. They called me for a reference since I was listed as his spouse during the time period on his resume. I told them the truth. He has no technical skills, takes credit for others' work, and I wouldn't recommend him for any position that requires integrity. He's working at a call center now. Helena had to sell her investment firm. Candace moved to Arizona to live with some distant relatives. They scattered like roaches when the light came on. If this story gave you the chills, smash that like button right now. Hit subscribe because I share power moves and real talk every single week. Comment, long game, if you understand that the best revenge takes patience and planning. And share this with every woman who's been underestimated, overlooked, or stolen from. Remember, they can laugh at you today, but make sure you're building something that'll make them regret it tomorrow. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strategic, stay powerful, and never let anyone throw out your worth. They laughed when his mistress poured champagne on my Valentino gown. They whispered when she kissed him in front of everyone, but nobody expected what I did next. By Monday morning, his empire was crumbling, and I was the one holding all the cards. This is how I made a billionaire beg. Before we get into this story, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because you won't believe how this ends. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. Now, let me take you back to the night that changed everything. My name is Lauren Harrison, and up until 3 years ago, I was married to one of the most powerful tech billionaires in the country. But this story isn't about him, it's about me, and how I went from being disrespected in my own home to walking away with everything I deserved. It started on a Saturday night in September. My husband, Derek, was throwing one of his legendary parties at our estate. $9 million worth of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific. 300 guests, celebrities I'd only seen on magazine covers, politicians whose names you'd recognize, business moguls worth billions, and me, the wife, standing in the corner like a piece of expensive furniture nobody remembered to dust. Let me back up for a second. Derek and I met 15 years ago at a tech conference in Austin. I was 33, a successful architect with my own firm. He was 40, charismatic, brilliant, and hungry. He had this idea for a data analytics platform that he swore would change everything. The problem, he had no money and no investors willing to take a chance on him. But I believed in him. More than that, I loved him. So when he asked me to invest my family inheritance, $4 million that my grandmother left me, I said yes. When he asked me to give up my architecture firm to support his dream full-time, I said yes. When he needed someone to manage operations while he played genius CEO, I said yes to that too. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of building an empire together. Except somewhere along the way, Derek forgot that we built it. He started telling people he was self-made, started introducing me as just my wife instead of his business partner. And then, about 2 years ago, he hired Sienna Vale as his executive assistant. So there I was at this party, watching Sienna float through my home like she owned it. She was 28, blonde, with legs that went on for days, and this syrupy sweet voice that made my skin crawl. She wore a silver dress that cost more than most people's rent, and she had this way of touching Derek's arm while they talked that made my stomach turn. But here's the thing that really got me. Nobody seemed to think it was strange. The guests treated her like the hostess. They asked her where the bathroom was. They complimented her on the decorations I'd spent 3 weeks planning. I was standing near the champagne fountain when I overheard 2 of Derek's business partners talking. One of them said, "Derek's really got it all now, doesn't he? Beautiful new girlfriend, company worth billions." The other one laughed and said, "Yeah, I heard he's finally ditching the old ball and chain." They didn't even lower their voices. I was 10 feet away, and they didn't care. That's when I realized I'd become invisible in my own life. I tried to compose myself, tried to remember that I was Lauren Harrison, the woman who helped build a billion-dollar company from nothing. But then Sienna appeared beside me with this fake smile plastered on her face. She was holding a bottle of Dom Perignon, the $3,000 kind that Derek kept in the cellar for special occasions. She looked at my dress, this gorgeous custom Valentino gown in deep emerald green, and she said, "Oh, Lauren, that dress is so brave." Not everyone can pull off bold colors at your age. Before I could respond, she tilted the bottle, and suddenly champagne was cascading down my chest, my dress, my shoes. The cold liquid shocked me into silence. Everything stopped. 300 people turned to look, and Sienna put her hand over her mouth in this theatrical gasp and said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm such a klutz. Derek, honey, your wife had a little accident. Honey." She called my husband honey in front of everyone, and Derek, he walked over, barely glanced at me, and said, "Baby, don't overreact. It was an accident. Go upstairs and change." Baby, that's what he used to call me. Now he was using it to dismiss me, like a child throwing a tantrum. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my own drink in his face. I wanted to tell everyone the truth about who really built his company. But instead, I smiled, nodded, and walked upstairs with as much dignity as I could gather, because I'd learned something important over the years. Powerful women don't make scenes, they make moves. I was standing in my bathroom, trying to clean the champagne out of my dress, when I heard voices in the hallway, Derek's voice and Sienna's voice, coming from the library across the hall. I walked quietly to the door and peered through the crack. What I saw made my blood run cold. Derek had Sienna pressed against the bookshelf, kissing her like his life depended on it. His hands were in her hair, her legs were wrapped around his waist, and they were going at it like teenagers without a care in the world. In our house, during our party, 20 feet from where 300 guests were celebrating his success. That was the moment. That was when something inside me just clicked. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was done. I pulled out my phone, took a few photos, and then I went back to the bathroom. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and I called my lawyer, Beverly Mitchell. It was 2 in the morning, but Beverly answered on the second ring. That's why I paid her the big bucks. I told her everything. The affair, the humiliation, all of it. And Beverly, God bless her, didn't waste time with sympathy. She said, "Lauren, we need to move fast. I've been doing some digging like you asked, and there's something you need to know." Turns out, Derek had been planning to divorce me for months. He'd been moving money into offshore accounts, preparing to offer me a small settlement while keeping the bulk of his wealth hidden. But here's where he made his mistake. He forgot about the paperwork we signed when I first invested in his company. I owned 40% of Derek's company. Not 40% of our shared assets, 40% of his company, the one worth $3 billion. Derek had been so confident that I'd never challenge him, so sure that I was just his quiet little wife, that he never thought to buy me out. And now his company was about to close a $500 million merger, and he needed my signature to make it happen. Beverly and I spent the next week building my case. I hired a forensic accountant who uncovered all of Derek's hidden assets. We documented every offshore account, every secret investment, every penny he'd tried to hide. We collected evidence of the affair, recordings of him telling investors that he built the company alone, proof that I'd invested not just money, but years of unpaid labor into making his dream a reality. Meanwhile, I played the perfect wife. I smiled at dinner parties. I attended his meetings. I watched Sienna parade around like she'd already won. Derek asked me several times to sign papers for the merger, and each time I told him I needed more time to review them. He was annoyed but not worried. After all, I'd been saying yes to him for 15 years. Why would I start saying no now? Wednesday afternoon, Derek came home early. I was in the kitchen making tea when he walked in, loosened his tie, and said, "Lauren, we need to talk." He didn't sit down, didn't even look me in the eye. He just stood there and said, "I want a divorce. This marriage isn't working anymore, and I think we both know it. I'm prepared to offer you $5 million as a settlement. That's more than generous, considering you haven't worked in years. Sign the papers, take the money, and let's end this civilly." $5 million. For 12 years of marriage, $4 million of my own money invested, and countless hours building his empire. He actually thought I should be grateful. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a stranger. This wasn't the man I'd married. This was someone who'd forgotten where he came from, who'd let success and a pretty face turn him into someone I didn't recognize. I smiled and said, "Let me think about it." He looked surprised, but nodded and left for his dinner meeting with Sienna. The moment he was gone, Beverly came over with the paperwork we'd prepared. It was time to make my move. Thursday morning, Derek's lawyer received our counter proposal. I wanted $50 million, or I would sell my 40% stake in the company to his biggest competitor, Brandon Cole. Derek called me screaming. He said I was being ridiculous, that I'd never go through with it, that it was a pathetic bluff from a desperate woman. I didn't argue, I just hung up. That afternoon, Sienna called me. She actually had the nerve to call me and say, "Lauren, Derek told me about your little tantrum. You need to be reasonable. Sign the papers, take the money, and move on with your life. Don't embarrass yourself." I asked her how long she'd been sleeping with my husband. She laughed and said, "Long enough to know he never loved you. You were just convenient." Then she hung up. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Pure, undiluted power. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that Derek's entire merger depended on my signature. I knew that without my shares, his deal would collapse. I knew that Brandon Cole had already agreed to pay me $120 million for my stake. And I knew that by tomorrow morning, Derek's perfect little world was going to come crashing down. Friday morning arrived. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. It was the final meeting before the merger was supposed to close. Derek expected me to be at home, probably crying into my pillow. Instead, I walked into that boardroom at 9:55, wearing a crimson-red suit that cost more than Sienna's entire wardrobe. Every head turned. Derek's face went white. The chairman started the meeting, going through the formalities, talking about the merger terms. Then he said, "We just need Mrs. Harrison's signature on the consent forms, and we can proceed." Everyone looked at me. I smiled, stood up, and said, "I'm not signing anything. Instead, I'm selling my 40% stake in this company to Brandon Cole for $120 million. The paperwork has already been filed. As of this morning, I'm no longer Derek's wife or his business partner. I'm done." The room exploded. Board members started yelling at Derek. His lawyer was frantically making phone calls. The chairman demanded to know how this happened. And Derek, he just sat there, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. The merger collapsed within the hour. Without my shares, the deal was dead. Derek's company stock dropped 34% in a single day. Investors pulled out. Banks started calling in loans. By Monday, his $9 million mansion was in foreclosure proceedings. Sienna left him that same night. Turns out, she wasn't in love with Derek. She was in love with his money. And when the money disappeared, so did she. I heard she got engaged to some hedge fund manager 3 months later, blocked me on all social media, like I cared. 3 months after the board meeting, Derek showed up at my new office. I'd started a venture capital firm, investing in businesses owned by Black women. I was thriving. He looked terrible, thin, exhausted, defeated. He said he'd lost everything. He begged me to sell the shares back to him, to help him rebuild. He actually had the audacity to say, "You're still my wife. We can fix this. I made a mistake." I looked at him and said, "Derek, I stopped being your wife the moment you forgot I was your partner. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to disrespect me, to erase my contributions, to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. And now you're facing the consequences of that choice. I'm not here to save you. I'm here to build something better without you." He tried to argue, tried to guilt me, tried everything. But I stood firm. My lawyer escorted him out, and I never saw him again. Last I heard, he's working middle management at some tech startup, making a fraction of what he used to earn. He's humbled now, learned his lesson the hard way. As for me, I'm doing better than I ever did with him. My firm is successful. I'm helping other women build their dreams without sacrificing themselves in the process. I bought a penthouse with a view better than the one we had at the mansion. I travel, I laugh, I'm free, and I never, not for 1 second, regret walking away. People ask me all the time if I feel guilty about destroying his company. The answer is no. I didn't destroy anything. I took what was mine. I protected what I'd built. And I refuse to let anyone make me feel small ever again. Derek made his choices, and I made mine. The difference is, I made mine from a place of strength, not weakness. Here's what I learned from all of this. Know your worth. Not what someone tells you you're worth, but what you actually bring to the table. Protect your assets, your investments, your future. Don't let love make you stupid, and never ever let anyone convince you that you should be grateful for crumbs when you baked the whole damn cake. That night, at the party, when Sienna poured champagne on my dress, she thought she was humiliating me. She thought she'd won, but she didn't realize she was just lighting the fuse. And when it finally exploded, I was the only one left standing. So that's my story. They tried to humiliate me at that party, but I had the last laugh. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who didn't value you? Share your story in the comments below. I promise you're not alone, and your experience matters. If this story inspired you, smash that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes we need to be reminded that we're stronger than we think. And remember this, never let anyone make you feel small. You're not just at the table. You don't just deserve a seat at the table. Sometimes you need to realize that you own the table, and you get to decide who sits there. Subscribe for more stories of women who refuse to be broken, who chose themselves, and who came out on top. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, know your worth, protect your peace, and never settle for less than you deserve.